No one ever expected him to speak again. Not after all the scandals, not after the silence that swallowed him for years. But Diane Keaton's death changed something in Woody Allen. At 89 years old, the man who built his life on irony and control suddenly sounded human, fragile, remorseful, and painfully aware of what he'd lost. The woman who once laughed through his darkest neuroses was gone, and with her, the last piece of his youth. What he's saying now is what everyone secretly suspected all along, the beginning of everything. It started in 1969, not on a movie set, but on a Broadway stage. Woody Allen was auditioning actresses for Play It Again, Sam at the Morosco Theater in New York. He was 33, already famous for his wit, but still painfully unsure of himself around women. Then Diane Keaton walked in. She was 23, eccentric, beautiful in an unpolished way, wearing mismatched clothes that didn't belong on any stage. And that's exactly why he couldn't look away. He would later write that he questioned his sanity that day. Was it possible, he said, to fall in love so quickly? She wasn't like anyone he'd ever met. Too open, too spontaneous, too unaffected by the intellectual games that defined his world. She read for the role, made everyone laugh, and got the part instantly. Within weeks, they were inseparable. Within months, she'd moved into his apartment. Their romance was strange and charming, built on contradictions. He was the neurotic intellectual from Brooklyn. She was the carefree California girl who made chaos look graceful. He loved her for the very things he couldn't understand about her: her lack of control, her honesty, her refusal to act like anyone else. But those same things terrified him. He began to shape her, direct her, even off camera, suggesting what to wear, what to read, what to think. She resisted quietly. When he corrected her grammar, she laughed and said the wrong word again. When he told her which books she should read, she ignored him and bought photography magazines instead. When he told her to tone down her outfits, she wore even louder ones. That rebellion, soft but unbreakable, was what made him love her more, and also what doomed them. By 1972, Diane had taken a role that would change her life: Kay Adams in The Godfather. Woody dismissed it at first. A gangster film, not her style, he said. But she went anyway, and when she returned, she wasn't the same. She'd worked with Coppola, Pacino, Brando, the world's greats. She was no longer Woody's project. She was her own person. And for Woody Allen, control meant safety, and losing control meant heartbreak. By the end of that year, they broke up. Neither ever forgot it. Annie Hall, turning love into art. 5 years after they broke up, Woody Allen did what only a director like him could do. He turned his heartbreak into cinema. In 1977, Annie Hall was released. It wasn't just inspired by Diane Keaton. It was Diane Keaton. Her real nickname was Annie. Hall was her birth surname before she changed it to Keaton. The clothes she wore on screen weren't designed by stylists. They came straight from her closet. The vests, the men's shirts, the loose ties, the offbeat charm that made her look like no other woman in Hollywood. Allen didn't just write her character. He built the film around her. The awkward conversations, the long walks, the messy breakup. All of it came from their real life. The film became his masterpiece, but for Diane, it was something far more personal. She was reliving a relationship that had already broken her heart, scene by scene, word by word, under the direction of the man who had caused that heartbreak. When Annie Hall premiered, audiences saw a love story that felt alive, witty, tender, and devastatingly real. But few realized they were watching two people working through their past in real time. The movie ended with a bittersweet goodbye. Two lovers parting with grace and understanding. But real life hadn't been that neat. The real breakup had been confusing, painful, unresolved. Woody had rewritten history, turned the heartbreak into art, the regret into poetry. That year, Annie Hall won Best Picture. Woody Allen won Best Director. Diane Keaton won the Oscar for Best Actress. On stage, clutching her award, she looked radiant, but those who knew her said she was trembling inside. It was the most beautiful, most painful victory of her life. Later, Woody admitted that Annie Hall wasn't a love letter. It was an exorcism. He said he made the film to understand why they failed, to get her out of his system. But that never happened. Some ghosts don't leave, even after the credits roll. Diane Keaton would always be his ghost, the one who laughed too loud, lived too freely, and never looked back. The years apart, and the ghost that stayed. When Annie Hall ended, their romance was officially over, but Woody Allen couldn't let her go. He cast her again just a year later in Interiors, then in Manhattan. Every few years, she reappeared in his work, like a haunting refrain. Friends noticed it. No matter how many new actresses he discovered, no matter how many relationships he began, Diane Keaton was always there. In his mind, in his writing, in the shadow of every female character he created. By the 1980s, Keaton had become a star in her own right. Reds, Baby Boom, Father of the Bride. While Woody's name was tied to both brilliance and controversy. But even as their lives moved on in different directions, they kept in touch, quietly, respectfully. Sometimes through phone calls that lasted hours, sometimes through years of silence that would suddenly break with a single message. How are you? Then, in 1992, everything changed. The world turned against Woody Allen. His long, bitter custody battle with Mia Farrow exploded into one of Hollywood's most public scandals, filled with accusations, betrayal, and disgust. His affair with Soon-Yi Previn, Mia's adopted daughter, shocked even those closest to him. The tabloids called him a monster. Actors who once idolized him walked away. Studios stopped answering his calls. And yet, one person didn't leave. When Woody cast Manhattan Murder Mystery in 1993, he called Diane, again. She wasn't even supposed to be in the movie. Mia had been. But Diane stepped in at the last minute. Working together after 20 years felt strange, like reopening a sealed memory. But it worked. Their chemistry, their timing, their quiet understanding, none of it had faded. That film became their quiet reunion. Not romantic, but human. Two people who had seen each other through the best and worst of life, standing side by side again. Woody later admitted that casting her saved him, both professionally and emotionally. For Diane, it was simple. She never saw herself as his defender or his savior. She saw a friend who was falling apart, and she refused to let him drown. What they built from then on wasn't love, and it wasn't nostalgia. It was something rarer, a lifelong connection that neither of them could define but both needed to survive. Loyalty in the firestorm. By the late 2000s, Woody Allen had become one of the most controversial figures in Hollywood. The Me Too movement had reignited old wounds, and the allegations from Dylan Farrow resurfaced with new intensity. Actors who once worked with him began to distance themselves publicly. Film festivals dropped his movies, streaming platforms canceled deals. The man who had defined an era of filmmaking was suddenly being erased from it. And through that storm, one voice stood by him, Diane Keaton. In January 2018, she took to Twitter and wrote just 13 words that changed everything for her. Woody Allen is my friend and I continue to believe him. She linked an old 1992 60 Minutes interview where Allen defended himself, saying, "It might be of interest to take a look and see what you think." Those words cost her more than anyone realized. Directors stopped calling. Roles quietly disappeared. Colleagues turned their backs. Social media tore her apart, labeling her delusional, complicit, or worse. But she didn't delete the tweet, didn't clarify, didn't apologize. It wasn't an impulsive act. It was loyalty. carved out of 50 years of knowing someone beyond headlines. People who knew them said she couldn't stand hypocrisy. She believed him, one source said simply. Not because she was blind, but because she knew the man for half a century and had seen him at his weakest, his most private. For Woody, that loyalty meant everything. "She believed me when no one else would," he reportedly told a friend. "She stood by me when it cost her everything. I didn't ask her to. She just did." Even as his world narrowed, as critics mocked him and studios refused to fund him, Diane was there, quietly, behind the noise. They spoke occasionally, mostly short calls and texts. When she defended him publicly, he'd message her afterward to say thank you. It wasn't romance, not even friendship in the traditional sense. It was something deeper, a kind of unspoken understanding between two people who had survived each other and now were surviving the world together. When Diane gave an interview in 2023, she doubled down. "I'm proud," she said. "I'm proud beyond measure of the work we did." Her words reignited the backlash, but also revealed something else. She didn't regret anything. Not the films, not the friendship, not the loyalty that had cost her so much. To her, it wasn't about taking sides. It was about standing for what she believed to be true, and standing by the man who had once seen her for exactly who she was. The final call and the confession. By 2025, both of them were living quietly, far from the world that had once celebrated and condemned them in equal measure. Diane Keaton's public appearances had grown rare. She canceled events, skipped interviews, and appeared noticeably frailer in her last few photographs. Those close to her suspected health problems, but she never said a word. Even her oldest friends didn't know how sick she was. Then, on October 11th, 2025, the news broke. Diane Keaton was dead at 79. The cause was not disclosed, only that it had been sudden. The Hollywood community fell silent, but no one was more shaken than Woody Allen. When reporters from People reached out to his circle, a source said simply, "He is extremely distraught and surprised." He didn't know she was ill. Nobody did. For a man who built his career on emotional control, the reaction was uncharacteristic. Friends described him as shocked into silence. He attended her small, private funeral in Los Angeles, moving slowly, looking older than ever. In his hands, he carried a framed photograph, the two of them laughing on the set of Play It Again, Sam in 1970. Witnesses said he couldn't stop crying. 2 days later, on October 13th, Woody Allen did something he hadn't done in decades. He wrote publicly about love. In a rare essay for the Free Press, he shared his memories of Diane, the first audition, the laughter, the chaos, the beauty. "When we first met," he wrote, "I thought she was so charming, so beautiful, so magical, that I questioned my sanity. Was it possible to fall in love so quickly?" He called her a genius, a natural comedian, a woman of impeccable judgment who had shaped his art and his life. But there was also regret. Deep, unmistakable regret. "We had a few great personal years together," he wrote, "and finally we both moved on. Why we parted, only God and Freud might know." In private, his words went even deeper. Sources close to him said he admitted something he had never confessed before, that he hadn't just loved Diane Keaton, he had tried to own her. "I loved her," he said, "but I loved controlling her even more." That wasn't love. That was fear. It was a rare moment of honesty from a man who spent a lifetime hiding behind irony. In losing Diane, he lost not only his muse, but the one person who had ever truly understood him. Regrets, mortality, and the woman who saved him. After Diane Keaton's death, Woody Allen's tone changed. The man who had once spoken in punchlines and paradoxes now spoke like someone running out of time. At 89 years old, he was no longer defending himself or his art. He was looking back, quietly, painfully, at what could never be undone. In private conversations, he began to tell friends what he'd kept buried for half a century. "She saw me for who I really was," he said. "Not the filmmaker, not the celebrity, just the insecure kid from Brooklyn. And she loved that person, even when I didn't." Then came the line that broke everyone who heard it. "I should have just let her be. I should have loved her as she was instead of trying to make her into what I thought she should be." He confessed that Annie Hall, the film the world called a love story, had always been his apology to her. He admitted that she gave him everything: the film, the credibility, the soul of his work. "Without her," he said, "I was just another neurotic man making comedies about neurotic people. With her, I was telling the truth." Those close to Allen say he still keeps her photograph nearby. The same one from 1970, both of them laughing, unaware of the storm that life would bring. He told a friend recently, "I didn't deserve her loyalty, but she gave it anyway. She believed in me when no one else would, and I'll never understand why." What makes their story tragic isn't just that it ended. It's that it never really did. 56 years, 9 films, countless arguments, silences, reconciliations, and in the end, she was still the center of his memory. The woman who turned his neurosis into poetry, who stood by him when everyone else walked away, who gave his art its beating heart. Diane Keaton wasn't just his muse, she was his mirror, the only person who ever reflected the truth back to him. Now, Woody Allen faces the one thing even he can't rewrite: mortality. His films may outlive him, but he knows that the real story, the one that began in a New York audition room and ended with a funeral photograph, will always belong to them both. Some loves don't fit into words, and some endings don't feel like endings at all. For Woody Allen, Diane Keaton was the great what if, the woman who changed his art and his life forever. Do you think their love was tragic, or was it fate? Let us know what you believe in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true Hollywood stories that will stay with you long after the credits roll.